Hi, everybody. Greetings and welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on April 21st, 2025. If anyone is new to our webinars today, our webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about NAHASDA Intermediate, and this is the first day of a 5-day series that will be instructed by Cheryl Cosley. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could join us for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. So just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Now that you've joined the learning platform, you will be able to access today's slides, the recording later on, as well as the slides for the next 5 days. They're in the courses section. There's also a pretty lengthy list of resource materials that Cheryl's put together for you. Those are also embedded into the course and available for download. But there is a link to today's presentation slides for you in the chat now. Every day that you join for the series, you'll just log in. You don't have to register for each individual one. You've registered once, so now you're in. You'll just log in during the webinar time and you'll join by clicking on that green banner at the top of the screen. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities just to cut down on any audio feedback. And then if you found that your audio is not coming from the right device, maybe you mean to be listening through your headphones or you have like a Bluetooth speaker, if you click on that little telephone icon at the bottom of your screen, you can bring up a list of your audio devices and you can select the right one. We, of course, want you to interact during today's webinar. So there's a few ways you can do that, but we'll primarily rely on the public chat. So if you have any questions or any comments, perhaps any tech support issues, you can just open up the public chat through that menu panel, type what you want to say or ask, and then you can enter or click on the paper airplane icon to submit. Cheryl's going to make the presentation full screen for her, so she's not going to be able to see the chat throughout the duration of the webinar. But if you think of a question, just send it in, and then she's going to respond to all your questions at the end. For now, we would love to know who is attending today's webinar, who's interacting with us. So if you could introduce yourselves in the chat, you could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's nice to see all the different places that are represented, your work or your role in Indian country that led you to today's webinar, and then your tribal affiliation if you have one. And I do have one final note while y'all introduce yourselves in the chat. Just know that if you click on that red menu panel that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen, it will pull you out of the webinar and take you to whatever place you've selected on the menu. But you can just click on the green banner at the top of the screen to join once again. I just want to give you a heads up that that will pull you out of the webinar. All right, folks, while you are introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor, Cheryl Cosley. And Cheryl, I am going to make you presenter now and hand it off to you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Welcome to NAHASDA Intermediate, day number 1. Thank you guys for joining us. So as she said, this is brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We fall under Native American programs there. So welcome and good afternoon. I did go out and smudge, you know, in Indian country, a lot of times we start things with a prayer. So I did do that. My information is at the beginning and the end of every presentation. So should you need anything, please feel free to reach out to me. My name, as Brooke said, is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I'm Loon Clan. I come from Keno-Shinkoning in my language, which means the place of the pike. And I'm from the Bay Mills Indian community. Our reservation is located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We're right at the top, and our waters actually border Canada. And we are a Ojibwe or Chippewa people. I served as Director of Housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time frame, I also served as Chairperson of the Great Lakes. That was the 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes area. And I served on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I started as a secretary, became the vice chair, did that probably for, another 10 years. So 12 right there. And then another 4. So I was a 2-term chairwoman of that organization. So got a lot of experience in housing anyway. I started Cheryl Cosley and Associates in March of 2019, and I provide training and technical assistance through the lower 48 and Alaska. I go to Alaska a couple of times a year. I've been working in the Pueblos a lot this winter. I work out, from coast to coast, basically. So I'm really, really blessed that I get to do what I love to do. And I've been able to do that my whole life, and that's helping our people. So this course is going to help you, housing administrators, housing the staff members, increase your knowledge of the federal rules and regulations that we have to adhere to when we accept that funding from HUD, and increase your knowledge of the requirements for use of policies, procedures within the block grant program areas. As Brooke said, there is a lot of reference materials in here. There's 32 of them. And right now, the HUD website has been redesigned, and it was down for like a week and a half. And it's kind of hard sometimes to get active links. You'll hit a link that should be there, and it's not anymore. So I might take these and put them on a thumb drive. It might actually prove to be helpful until we get things sorted out and things get changed there. So the NAHASDA statute you definitely need, the regulations you definitely need, the uniform administrative requirements. I went to the dentist and I still have a numb lip. Please forgive me. So those 3 are really important, as well as the total development cost at 27. When you build, you have to build within certain cost. The monitoring plans at 32 are very good. The use of program income is very informative, especially for your finance staff. The binding commitments. So there's a lot of good stuff in here that hopefully you guys will utilize. So this is the overview of the next 5 days. Today we're going to hit on, hey, how do we learn where anything's at? That NAHASDA overview. And then 2 CFR 200. The regs, the NAHASDA statute, those are written for Indian country for our program. 2 CFR Part 200, that uniform guidance, my least favorite of all of them. It's because it's for the government as a whole. So it's kind of hard to pull our information out of there. We're going to talk about conflict of interest, some of those prohibitions that we have to have in place, to make sure that our board of commissioners, our tribal council, and our staff know about recusal and adhering to certain things. Tomorrow, we're going to get into management capacity, some of the compliance criteria that we have to keep up with as far as the audit requirements, development capacity. When we start to build, do you have that project management capacity? Once you build it, do you have the people there to run it? Our eligibility requirements, all those people that we can serve within our tribe, the statutory deductions, housing for our non-low income members, the different ways that we can service them. Some of those eligible activities are affordable housing activities that we can undertake with those funds. Wednesday, we're going to hit on the policies versus procedures, your application package, that environmental review process, the development process as a whole, total development cost and planning, construction compliance components. Thursday, we'll get into, once you're into construction, you got to get into those Indian and tribal preference requirements. Make sure that you adhere to uniform relocation, assistance, real property acquisition. Make sure you're doing your procurement properly. And we're going to get into the methods of procurement and things like that on Thursday also. Friday, that useful life, a lot of slippage in Indian country over that, making sure that you have the right components to that policy in there. And then those labor requirements and some of our self-monitoring. And then a couple of our programs such as Title VI and 184. So it's a pretty full week. I hope you stay with us. questions, if you jot them down and put them in the question area. I can't see them right now. Brooke's keeping an eye on them, and I will try to answer them at the end of the day, guys. So this is our first module, and that is the overview of NAHASDA, understanding, the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and things like that. So NAHASDA, first of all, what is it? It's the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act of 1996. It's color-coded by amendment. So every time that it was touched, amended, anything like that, you'll see that the strikeouts and the things like that, and they're all in different colors. It's 54 pages long. So you can get through that relatively, well, not relatively quickly, but our guidance is quite unique, that everything is in one book. And one thing will send you to another thing, but it's really important that you take that time to learn, to explore that. Make copies, of whatever you're looking for, and then go search that other section. And that's how you learn about all the other rules. Sometimes you'll learn about rules you didn't even know you were looking for when you're searching for something. So as I said, statutes color-coded by, amendment. Okay, now why won't it turn? Hold on. That's funny. Having a thing already. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to escape out of there. My page there. My page won't turn, my girl.
Oh no, did it go like too big again?
I got it down to size, but I can't find the arrow.
Here, I'll take presenter real quick and give it back to you, and then see if that fixes it.
Okay.
Okay, can you see it now?
Nope.
Do we want to try exiting and rejoining and seeing if that brings it back to the right size?
Will you go to the next page?
Sure.
See if that will give it to me, maybe.
No problem. See it now?
Yeah, that's way out of whack. Yeah, I'm going to have to go back out, I think.
Okay, no problem. I'll make you presenter again when you come back in. Sorry, folks, just a brief moment, please.
We got a glitch. Okay.
Thanks so much for your patience, guys. We just need a couple of moments to get us back on track here.
Can you hear me, Brooke?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So back in business?
I'm back in business.
All right, awesome.
Keep it small right now. So the history of NAHASDA, it was signed into law in 1996, and it streamlined the process for providing housing for our Native American people. Congress actually appropriates the money for the benefit of low-income Native American people. It replaced quite a few programs. One of the things, we used to be able to compete for everything. They decided that they would give us, a pot of money, and basically we could do with it what we wanted, whatever activity. But, there wasn't, a lot of competition now under NAHASDA for different programs. So it encourages the tribes to determine what are best for their community members and their, their communities and their tribal people. So the strength is it gives the tribes more responsibility, more flexibility. You can decide who you want to serve, what kind of product. It doesn't mandate what you have to do, except for the fact that if you're receiving current assisted stock monies, if you have that money from the 1937 Housing Act, that you take care and you preserve those units, then basically you decide what you're going to do with your funding, how you're going to deliver those programs and those projects. We are, as I said, still required to take care of that 1937 Housing Act stock. So all of these programs were kind of taken away. We can offer them, you know, youth sports, youth build, things like that. You know, you can help fund or you know, utilize your Boys and Girls Clubs, things like that. Took away the homeless programs, the comprehensive grant and comprehensive improvement modernization program. We used to call that CAP. We would be able to compete to get all of, you know, our housing stock basically rehabbed and modernized. The traditional Indian housing development program. So it did away with a lot of those and said, okay, we're going to give you this money. You decide what you want to do with that. So it provides for an Indian housing block grant. Okay. And it is formula driven, and we'll get into that later on, you know, during the week, how you come about receiving your money, how that formula is broken down. It makes our assistance directly available now to tribes. Under the 1937 Housing Act, we had to be separate. We had to be a housing authority separate from the tribe. Under NAHASDA, the tribe can be, you know, the caretaker, and you could be a tribal department, you could be a housing entity, you can be a TDHE. It's all different. And you can also utilize subrecipients if you want to. So in order to interpret and implement NAHASDA, the regulations were developed in negotiated rulemaking, is what they called that. That is mandated in the NAHASDA statute, that anytime that we do anything with the formula, anytime anything is done with the regulations, that they convey what they call neg reg. And it's an unusual way of, you know, writing regulations and changing rules. It's done by unanimous consent, so it's not always easy, but it's really fair to everybody. So it replaced the act, you know, the U.S. Housing Act of 1937, all those regulations found at 950, and put forth the regulations at CFR 1000 within the statute themselves. So, and it gave us necessary policies, procedures for the administration of our grants made available to our tribes and TDHEs under that block grant program. So there's an active link here if you ever want to read about any of those negotiated rulemaking sessions. And the work papers are found there also. So like I said, it's very interesting, that process. So what'll happen, let's say it was reauthorized. If NAHASDA is to be reauthorized, they would convey negotiated rulemaking, or somebody wanted to do something to the formula, or, you know, change any of those rules. So the first thing they would do is, if it was a HUD review or a congressional reauthorization, they would call for committee formation, and they do that in the Federal Register. They'll put out a notice. They'll send out an invitation, and people, they want, you know, that wide variety, that audience from across, you know, all the regions in the United States. They want the Pueblos at the table. They want the rancherias. They want the Alaska villages. They want the small tribes and the large land-based tribes, you know, everyone there. They want that representation. And they'll take the nominees, and then they'll try to pick people from all over, and they'll form that committee. Then they'll schedule the meetings, and they oftentimes will take a series, you know, a couple of years. They'll work on the product, and then they'll put forth a proposed rule, and they will publish that again in the Federal Register, and then they put that out for comment. So the people that aren't there can comment on what kind of information was received and what was decided upon. And then after they, you know, receive that, they meet again, and then they'll put forth a final rule, and they will publish that. And then HUD will publish guidances and notices to implement that rule. So that's basically how that part works. So when you need to learn about our program, This is the place you go. These are our books. So you go to the NAHASDA statute first. It's always the first place you look. Then you go to the regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000. Then you go to the Uniform Administrative requirements at Part 200. That controls basically anything finance, procurement, money, contract wise. And then we have program guidances and PIH notices that you also look to. The difference between all of those documents, the statute, the NAHASDA statute is a federal law written by Congress, so it can only be changed by an act of Congress. If it tells you you have to do something in the NAHASDA statute, you have to do it. That is in your reference material. That's the first item there. So the regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000, that's the next place you're going to look. Those regulations were written to implement the statutes. They can be waived by a departmental secretary, in our case, from HUD. And they're written to administer the rules, to make sure that the federal agency that's designated within the statute, so, HUD, then more specifically, the Office of Native American Programs, they will be, they're our designated federal agency. A copy of those regulations are in the reference material number 2. And then we have our program guidances and our public and Indian housing notices. So when you go to explore HUD, you just type that in there. It's going to bring you to the public side. Okay, we're our own component. In our notices and things, we'll say PIH, means public and Indian housing. That IH in there has to be there for it to apply to us. And when I started years ago, all I had to do basically was open the mail. And then you knew something was coming down the pipe that we had to do. You have to follow this rule. They've changed this reg, they want this run this way now. That's not the way it is anymore. Nothing comes through the mail. Our formula components, those things like that, those were the only things, the last piece that used to come through the mail, and now we still have to go retrieve those ourselves. So it's up to you to make sure that you get on the HUD website. More specifically, in our situation, we go to Code Talk. That is the component. But like I said, that got redesigned about 2 weeks ago now. It's a little bit different. Things aren't in the same places. You have to search a lot harder to find some of the things, and some of them are not quite there yet. But I'm hoping that will improve. So as I said, the statute is a federal law written by Congress, only changed by an act of Congress. Our regulations were written to implement the statute. They can be waived by the Secretary of HUD. And our notices are our official transmittals regarding policy issues, procedural topics. They cannot be waived if it relates to that, regulation or statute. And the guidances are written to give us more information. It's to implement the IHBG program. It's the tools we need. They give us, really defined guidance, how to do things, and clarifying, our technical topics. So those notices, those official transmittals, to our recipients typically regard policy issues and procedural topics. The information in HUD notices can actually be waived by the Assistant Secretary for Native American Programs. And those guidances, like I said, they help clarify those technical topics on our behalf. So those are really, really good to learn. And there's a search bar in there. You can search, FBI, and it'll bring up FBI guidances and things like that when you're looking for things. So you do go to the PIH notices and those guidances also when you're searching for an answer. So those statutes, those regulations, the guidance bulletins, the PIH notices, they work together to give us that full picture of each of our opportunities and our responsibilities. So when negotiated rulemaking, was charged with drafting the regulations from the statute, they decided that they weren't going to repeat anything unless the statute was not clear. Okay, so what you find in the statute is going to be different than what you find in the regulation. Okay, so you need to be able to refer to both the statute and the regulation simultaneously to have that complete understanding of NAHASDA. So like I said, you need to make sure that you go to the Code Talk site. Your director should be on there 1 to 2 times a week. You as employees in the housing entity should also be on there. You know, you should never be on Facebook. You should be searching their eggs in the statute and things like that and learning more about our program. You'll end up knowing more than some of the people that have been there a while if you do that exploring, you know. So get in there and search around. So there's the link, you know, that HUD.gov Code Talk. You should be in there at least weekly. I would say twice a week. That's where you get, you know, all those program guidances, PIH notices. Go into the Dear Tribal Leader letter section. We stutter over that one. They have a lot of good stuff in there, and it's not just for the tribal leaders. I don't know why they, you know, that's the depository of all good things, it seems like. So it'll have a current link to the statute, the regulations, and all of that also. And your regulations and things actually get updated quite a bit. So it's good to get, you know, an updated version. So if you were to go on the Code Talk website as of the last 2 weeks ago, this is what it looks like. This isn't the way that it used to look before, but if you go to everything ONAP under ONAP A to Z, click that blue link, it'll bring you, I'll show you what it'll bring you, but that's got a lot of the information right under, you know, under that point. Otherwise, you can go into like IHBG Competitive, Indian Community Development Block Grant Program, COVID-19 resources, the VASH program, the 184, Title VI, or Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So this is everything under A to Z, or half of it anyway, which you can see in the screenshot. And it's got best practices in there by activity type. You know, there's your Dear Tribal Leader letter section. The ELOCs, if you need to get in there, your environmental resources, you know, learn how to use heroes and things like that. Historic preservation consultation, got to get into things like that when you do your building. The income limits, those should be up and changing pretty soon now, guys. I would expect them within a month or so. So keep your eye out for those. The Indian Housing Block Grant, the Indian Community Development Block Grant. So all those areas there. There's the rest of it. Native Hawaiian housing, our regulations, our program guidances, resources, you know, so there's a lot of good information. There's our uniform guidance. That'll give you an active link to that. So make sure you get in there and start exploring that. Learn our rules. So they just put this up and it's kind of outdated. So it was an older document that they put up because it refers to EPIC. It refers to GEMS, but it also refers to EPIC. We need to utilize GEMS, okay? As of September of 2023, we file our IHPs and our APRs and our 425s all through GEMS. EPIC is not really used anymore except as a, you know, maybe a format, I guess you would say. So this will show you the shutdown. It shows you the GEMS link. And if you're not in GEMS, you can read about how to, you know, get yourself around in there. That is an active link there. The formula, hit that. That's how you find out your money. You should be checking that. The formula response form and things like that. I didn't really, you know, when you start as a director, you're really, really busy, but you need to check the information for your tribe. Is your enrollment right? You know, and some of the items like that. Your program guidances, NAHASDA statute, that's all in here. So that's how you get to the website, what's new on Code Talk, you know, and all these other things. But it's smaller. It's a smaller version right now, and not everything's where you'd think it would be. So this is our ONAP offices, our contacts. You can click on those and it will bring you to some of the tribes within your area. And it'll bring you to the staff members within your HUD office usually. And it'll tell you, you know, Northwest is made up of Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, you know, things like that. So Eastern Woodlands. this is the area that I'm from: Alabama, Connecticut, Florida, Iowa, Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, North Carolina, New York, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So we're a pretty big area. And this is all of us, this big old blue area here. Call your HUD people always too if you need it. They're there for you. And then the uniform guidance. There's also crosswalk of changes, different things that's happened within 2 CFR 200. But this is where you go to learn all of your information about our programs, okay? Grants.gov if you want to, go after some more grant money, and some different forms and handbooks, So it's really important that you become familiar with all of that. And then there is this on there that I tried signing up for last week and it didn't let me. So we'll see. I should have tried it again today. But there's a what's new on Code Talk. So maybe they'll be sending out stuff for us. So make sure you know the rules for when it comes to applying guidance. There is program-specific requirements that you must follow when they are provided, okay? The uniform guidance is followed when program-specific requirements are not provided in accordance with 1026. To understand our requirements, first you go to the statute, then you go to the regulations, then you go to our PIH notices, then you go to the program notices, and then the uniform guidance if necessary. So the Indian Housing Block Grant Program specific requirements are generally not duplicated. So what it will do is send you from one to the other, but it won't repeat the same thing in each piece. Okay, so the guidance overview here, your policies, okay, play a big part in this. Your housing and tribal policy can actually be stricter than what the statute or the regs or the notices and the guidances would allow sometimes. You have to follow your policies. So get into perhaps the area of procurement. If your old procurement policy used the old micro purchase threshold of $3,500, it was raised to $10,000 in 2019. If you procured an item at $5,000, you would still have a finding because of the fact that you broke your own policy. And you can get in just as much trouble for breaking your own policy as you can for breaking the policy published by the regulation. So it's really, really important, especially in the areas of procurement and things like that, that you know what your limits are, basically. So this is the guidance that comes from 2023 that allows you to raise your thresholds in procurement if you're doing a lot of building. It's not a one and done thing, and there's certain steps and criteria that you have to undertake. You have to demonstrate organizational financial capacity through an institutional risk assessment, but it will allow for approval of micro purchase thresholds greater than $50,000, which is, pretty big. So if, that's a long, hard decision that you have with your decision makers, your governing body, if you want to undertake, bringing up your procurement thresholds because you're doing a lot of business, there's a caveat that it only applies basically to your use of NAHASDA funds. So your tribal funds, if they're in there, that wouldn't allow for that. Because like I said, your procurement threshold is governed by 200. NAHASDA statute itself is basically the only thing that allows for this provision. It works with your VASH housing though, and your ICDBG. So there's more information. You can establish that threshold higher than the threshold of 10,000 by self-certifying up to 50,000, and you have to do that on an annual basis. So like I said, it's not a one and done. You have to make sure that your auditors are, your audits are up to date. You're without findings, certain things like that. But you can raise those thresholds if you meet all that criteria. Okay, that annual internal institutional risk assessment to make sure that you identify, mitigate, and manage any type of financial risk. So the statute was the summary and the key points actually put into law, signed into law in October of 1996. It was amended in 2012 again, became fully effective, the amended version, in 2014. NAHASDA stands for the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act. It has 7 congressional findings, basically that the federal government has a responsibility to promote the general welfare of our nation, that we have that unique relationship between the tribes and the federal government, that the United States has that trust responsibility to protect and support our Native people, that Congress has assumed a responsibility to improve our housing and our socioeconomic conditions, that the United States has a special role in providing affordable homes and a safe and healthy environment for our Native people, that the federal government shall work to assist the development of private housing and put into place finance mechanisms on Indian land, and that there shall be federal assistance provided in a manner that actually recognizes our Indian self-determination and our tribal self-governance. So everything is split up basically within statutes, within the statute, into certain areas. So it's to assist and promote affordable housing activities, so you can develop, maintain, and operate affordable housing in that safe and healthy environment on our reservations and our Indian areas for occupancy, again, by low-income Indian families, to ensure better access to that private mortgage market for our tribes and our members, to promote self-sufficiency, to coordinate activities to provide housing for the tribes, to promote self-sufficiency, to plan and integrate infrastructure, huge cost when we go to build that with our housing development and for our tribes, and to promote the development of private capital markets in Indian country and allow the markets to operate and grow, benefiting our Indian communities. So as I was trying to say just now, they're split up into statutory sections. So when you go to read NAHASDA or you go to read the regulations, that's how you know where to look for a certain subject. So the titles within the statutes: Title 1 is your block grant and your requirements. 2 is your affordable housing activities. What can I do with this, funding? 3 is the allocation of the grant amounts. 4 is compliance, our audits, our reports. What do we have to do to receive that money and stay compliant? Termination of assistance is under 5. Federal guarantees for financing, and Title 7, which is other housing assistance. So the statutory sections: 1, remember the block grant and grant requirements. It covers your Indian housing plan and your other federal requirements. It's what you have to do to receive this money. Title 2 tells you about your eligible activities, what you can do, that, it's got low income targeting and other program requirements that you have to follow. 3 talks about the allocation of those grant amounts, covers your annual allocation and your formula. This is how you go about getting this money. 4 talks about that compliance. You got to do this type of audit. You have to have this kind of report. It covers your remedies for non-compliance and your monitoring and your annual performance reports, those reports you have to have in. 5 is the termination of assistance for Indian tribes under those incorporated programs, and it'll cover those repealed programs that we talked about, the youth build and sports and youth sports and different programs like that. The federal guarantees under Title 6, financing for the provisions of our loan guarantee programs. And 7 talks about the 184 program and other assistance for our Native Americans. So the regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000 used to drive me crazy and still does, because it's written in a question and answer format. And oftentimes I'll find myself searching for something and that's not the question that I have, so it's written in a question and answer format to address the provisions of the statute that's necessary to implement NAHASDA. The regulations became final in 1998. They've been amended multiple times since then. Okay. These were all the times that they amended them, 2003, 2004, 2005, 7, 12, 14, you could read about that. And you can actually link to some of those things. So the regulations, again, in subparts, your general objectives are at subpart A. B is your affordable housing activities. 3 is your Indian housing plan. 4 is your allocation formula. E is your federal guarantees for financing of our tribal housing guarantees, and the recipient monitoring, compliance, oversight, and accountability is in subpart F. So they're then divided into 6 subparts. So A is general. It reinstates or restates basically the primary objectives. It contains legal authority of the regulation, other applicable laws, because we are the most heavily regulated program that your tribe will run. When you start getting into, these 5 days, you're going to see all these other places that we have to learn the rules so we're in compliance with the program. It's just not housing. It goes into environmentals. It goes into, all of these different directions, real property acquisition, things like that we have to learn about, lead-based paint, housing insurance, all of these areas that we have to be compliant with. Subpart B talks about those housing activities. What can we do? What are our eligible activities? Who can be the participants? Who can be the beneficiaries? Is there a cost and payment limit? How much can we charge them? What do we do when they don't make any money? Things like that. And taking care of that existing housing stock, that 1937 housing stock. And then your Indian housing plan, sets forth the requirements concerning the preparation, the submission, and the review of that IHP. If you don't submit that IHP, and you can only get a deadline for, a minute amount of days, you don't get your money for that entire year. It's really, really important. Look around, make sure that somewhere within your office, it's got on a board when your IHP is due and when your APR is done. Just in case, something should happen, that you lose staff or whatever be the reason, that somebody is getting that in on your behalf. Okay. That's terribly important. So subpart D is the allocation formula, establishes the formula for allocating the amounts, so how do we get the amount that we get? The federal guarantees, the financing of our housing activities, the terms and the conditions which HUD's going to guarantee those obligations for purposes of putting together financing those eligible housing activities are found under E. And then the monitoring and stuff under subpart F. Your oversight, your accountability, your monitoring, your self-monitoring, your auditing, all of those different, compliance performance reports, remedies for non-compliance, the responsibilities of HUD, they have responsibilities that they have to make sure that certain steps take also, So program implementation requires that you put in that 1-year housing plan on a yearly basis for your upcoming program year. It details activities such as development, rehab, acquisition, credit counseling, allows the tribe or TDHE to determine what programs they want to offer, flexibility in determining how to operate, who you want to serve. I'm really hoping, maybe this year that they will updo this document, I guess you would say, update the document, because it refers to EPIC and things like that in there, but it's the only one that gives you the actual explanation as to how to submit the IHP and the APR. But some of the materials in there is outdated. So then you have your key program elements, the formula. First of all, you got to understand how much money you're getting, why you get that money, how they come about that figure. And then your eligible families. Who is eligible among your tribal members? And then what can I do as an eligible activity? There's all sorts of things you can do with the money. You usually run out of money before you run out of activities, and then how do I, administer that program to be able to serve them? Then the financial management component. Okay. If you're a housing department, you got to really be careful here. little bit of slippage, you know, if the finance isn't done in-house. I've seen delays in IHPs, APRs, even in your tenant account receivables, because the finance people don't know the necessity and the importance of giving those numbers to your ED in a timely manner, so you can, you know, get your reporting, your mandatory reporting done, so you can do your collections, things like that. So that financial management is a huge component. And then your reporting and your record keeping, because if you don't do that, you don't get your money in the end either. So some of those key points, you know, it provides a block grant to the tribe or the tribally designated housing entity, however your tribe decides they want to offer that program. Used for activities defined in your Indian housing program. So if you want to undertake an activity, it's got to be listed in that IHP, okay? Then you got to turn around in the APR and say, I said I was going to serve this many people, but I only served this many, and this is why. So it's a mechanism that they put into place so we could report to Congress. For years and years and years, they would ask the tribes, you know, to come up with this information, and then they would ask the HUD office, and we didn't have a really good mechanism for saying, well, we got $1 million, we served 300 families with the rental program, we give down payment assistance to this many, and we built this many homes. We didn't have a good way to get our hands on that number, you know, really quickly. Now the IHP and the APR lets them know. We can look up that information. This is what we did with that money. So it defines that TDHE as your existing IHA, which is established under the 1937 Housing Act. Okay, so for those of you that could, you know, really be new in here and not know, this is the difference. Okay, we started out with the 1937 Housing Act. When we built, we competed for our housing. If we were lucky, you know, I would get 10, 20 houses at a time, build 10. I'm going to build 10 rentals and 20 mutual help, which is an ownership program. At that time, under the 1937 Housing Act, so all the way until 1996, basically, when we did that, if we were successful in competing, we would get money to run those houses. Not only to build them, but to continue to administer them. So the mutual help homes that our tribes had, the majority of that money should be gone. The subsidy that went with that for that. The rentals, as long as you keep them with people in them, okay, you don't use them for a VASH unit, you don't use them for a laundromat, it's got to be for actual housing. Those 1937 Housing Act, you try not to ever let them sit vacant for a year, because you're jeopardizing your money, okay? But that money stays there with that unit forever, as long as you maintain it and do the upkeep on those houses. And they're called CAS, Current Assisted Stock. Those apply to the houses that were built with the 1937 Housing Act, okay? Once 1996 rolled around and NAHASDA rolled around, then we were just given a lump sum of money. If you want to build, you build, but you don't get any money, additional money, for the upkeep of those units. So it's really, really important that those houses that you built before 1996, if they're a rental, they should be the top of your maintenance guys and your executive director's radar, because you need to preserve the subsidy that comes with that current assisted stock. And that is one of the most stringent rules that HUD has. They want to make sure that you're maintaining those, that you are doing the inspections on them, that there are people in them, and that you are doing the upkeep and the modernization on those units, because you're getting an ongoing subsidy for them. I've seen situations where tribes have said, you know, they've been in that house for 25 years. They own that by now. Why don't we just give it to them? And I have told them this: if you want to do that, that is your own, you know, responsibility. You are the leadership, but I would suggest that you just build them a house and give them the new house. Keep the subsidy related to that other one, because it can't be replaced. Those units are worth their weight in gold, you know, as far as our programs go. So Always, always, if you have any of those, you make sure that those are kept up maintenance-wise and rented as quick as you can, because they will come in and check those rent rolls to make sure that they are. Okay. So your tribes can also establish other entities through self-governance powers or state laws. You know, you can have somebody else run your housing for you if you want. So the key points of NAHASDA: permits the tribe, okay, to set a maximum rent that does not exceed 30% of the monthly adjusted income. 30% of zero is zero. So if you have somebody in a rental project or home ownership and they have no money, you cannot charge them any money if they're low income. Now, there's a caveat to that. Should that household, okay, and this is everybody, this is their, adjusted income at 80%. If they are above 80% of median income, if they fall between 80 and 100%, you can still service them under different programs that we'll talk about during the week, and you can charge them more. As a matter of fact, you're supposed to charge them more, okay, because they're not low rent, they're median income. So, or, moderate income. We'll use that instead. So you cannot exceed that 30% of that monthly adjusted income. Requires the tribe to use the block grant to operate and maintain the current housing units. Distributes the grant through an allocation formula developed under negotiated rulemaking. Remember, if they do anything to the formula, they have to convey NAHGREG. Authorizes a federal guarantee program. The tribes can use, with the Secretary's approval, a federal guarantee to undertake affordable housing activities that does not exceed 5 times the amount of the need portion of your grant. Okay, it's only that one component. So Title VI, and we kind of, I think, end up finishing up on day 5 with this information, basically. The purpose of Title VI loan guarantee is to assist recipients called borrowers because they receive loans who want to finance eligible affordable housing activities but are unable to secure financing without the assistance of a federal guarantee. The guarantee is a pledge by the government to repay all or a portion of an unpaid principal balance or accrued interest on an obligation by a borrower to a lender after default under the terms of the repayment agreement. Regulations are published at 24 CFR Part 1000, Subpart E, and the borrower leverages their block grant funds to finance affordable housing activities today by pledging future grant amounts as a security for repayment of the guaranteed obligation. A private lender or investor provides the financing, and HUD provides the guarantee to the lender or the investor. So the borrower repays the obligation. If the borrower fails to repay the debt and a default is declared, HUD's going to repay that obligation on your behalf, basically, and seek reimbursement from your formula. So that's how they guarantee that loan. Eligible borrowers under this program includes the tribe or the TDHEs authorized by the tribe to receive the funds and make the obligations. Okay. Eligible lenders under the Title VI loan guarantee program are listed at 1,404. And eligible activities under Section 202 in NAHASDA are the same as for the block grant program. So what must the tribe pledge to HUD to receive the Title VI loan? Well, the tribe, the TDHE, pledges the need portion of the annual block grant funds and the financed project's income to HUD as collateral for the loan guarantee. The pledged funds can still be used by the tribe or TDHE for eligible block grant activities, including debt service, unless they have defaulted on a previous loan. So does a tribe or TDHE have to comply with the IHBG regulations if the money is actually coming from a private lender? Yes, Title VI and block grant funds are authorized under NAHASDA, subject to the block grant regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000. The regulations apply to any project that uses funds from a loan guaranteed under Title VI. So this is a perfect example of, this has come straight from the regulations at 1000. There's your question. Does the tribe have to comply with the regulations if the money's coming from a private lender? And there's your answer. That's how the regs read. It's a question and answer format, and you just hope that their question answers, you know, your questions, I guess you would say. So it's interesting, but that's the format it kind of uses. So here we go again. This is another example. Does the project have to be on trust land or allotted land? No. The project must be located in an area that the tribe or TDHE currently serves using their NAHASDA funding. The project must also be included on, you know, in the tribe's Indian housing plan. That's the key. And you can amend your Indian housing plan at any time. If you want to undertake an activity, first thing you do is go to your Indian housing plan and see if it's listed. If it's not, you modify your Indian housing plan, you resubmit it. Usually, you know, their turnaround time isn't that long, especially if it's a legal activity. So your loan guarantee program, it allows, you know, HUD guaranteed loans secured by Indian families, housing authorities, tribes, TDHEs, under the 184 program. They can be the borrower, the tribe can be the borrower, the housing entity can be the borrower. 1 to 4 units located within Indian country, tribally designated areas, and reservations. So when 184 came about, basically, my tribal council went and did the paperwork, so we're allowed to run the 184 program for Bay Mills anywhere in the whole state of Michigan. That was the service area that we listed for this program. The regulations are published at 24 CFR Part 1005. Trust land is not the only land eligible for a Section 184 loan. Land located in an Indian area or Alaskan area are eligible locations for the 184 guaranteed home loan, and fee simple lands within an approved Indian area. And you can look back in this PIH notice, goes all the way back to 2004-19, is allowed under Section 184. And you could go back into, you know, into Code Talk all the way back to, I've pulled up notices from 1999, I think, and 2002. You can read those whole notices there. So the key points: reauthorizes the housing loan guarantee program. It extended our leasehold interest in trust and restricted lands for housing purposes for up to 50 years. Specifically addresses families who are above low income. We're now allowed to service them under the 37 Act. We weren't. And expanded, you know, our housing opportunities, the different activities we could undertake. And it requires HUD to actually monitor for non-compliance, take steps when our compliance does not occur. So the regulations, you know, it's 1,000 when you see that 1,000. Then you go into the regs and you just drop through there by number. Okay, so like 12 is non-discrimination. Relocation, real property acquisition is found at 14. Your environmental review requirements are at 18. Administrative requirements are at 26. Conflict of interest in admissions is 1,030 to 34. Our records retentions at 36. So once you start reading these, looking for things, you'll find out more rules just by reading them. You know, affordable housing activities, tenant project-based rental assistance, eligible families, what families require HUD approval, conditions for a non-low-income family's participation, tribal Indian preference, tribal preference in selecting families for housing. You know, so, and there's a lot more. That's just, you know, some of those key ones. So to understand those program requirements, you have to understand how to start researching first that NAHASDA statute, then 24 CFR Part 1000, then our program guidances, our PIH notices, and then 2 CFR Part 200, those uniform administrative requirements. So that's how you understand how to read the rules basically to NAHASDA. So the Code of Federal Regulations, if you've ever dealt in those, they used to be in, well, you still get them, but when we didn't have, I don't want to say when we didn't have the internet, when there wasn't a lot of things online, that shows you how old I am. I used to have to buy CFR books by title, you know, and they were all bound in my bookcase at, you know, at work, that would teach you about these. So the CFR results from a grant authority in law to the proposed rule, then the final rule, and then our codification within the Code of Federal Regulations. That's what the CFR stands for. public law, Federal Register, proposed rule, Federal Register, actual rule, Code of Federal Regulations, okay? So it's the legal process of our federal regulatory process, and it's established by the combined requirements of the Federal Register Act. So there's a numbering system, okay? It has a uniform numbering system. Most of the 50 titles conform to that system. It's the basic unit of the CFR. You cite the CFR by the title and the section. So it's 12 CFR 303.1. The text is divided into descending levels of units, and the website link for any CFR is edcfr.gov, and that's where you would go to, first search. So this is the level of the paragraphs, okay, to learn your way around them and to cite them. Okay, so enough about those. Now we'll get into the 2 CFR Part 200. So that is your uniform guidance. And some of the other things we will hit upon is the contract administration there, and the required, standards of conduct and ethics and prohibitions and other things that is required there. So our 2 CFR Part 200 is to ensure the accountability of all of our federal funding. Okay, so the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, establishes those administrative requirements, our cost principles, our audit requirements for our federal awards to non-federal entities, and that's what we're called. The regulations implementing NAHASDA at 24 CFR 1000 include a variety of general administrative requirements that have to be followed by recipients, accepting those IHBG funds. Prior to 2014, the regulations addressing administrative requirements cited some older documents, okay? OMB A87, those were the cost principles, the administrative requirements, they were at 102, and it was codified in programs at 24 CFR 85. So if any of your financial documents, any of your procurement documents, any of your policies, your procedures actually list any of these numbers, anything with that A in there, you need to update your policies immediately. And they're still there. I saw some a year ago. Even though they're that old, sometimes people don't realize that you have to change all of your policies and procedures when they reflect upon a document that is no longer in existence, okay? So they streamlined, there was 8 basic OMB circulars, 87, 102, 133. They put them all into this one, okay? The consolidation was aimed at eliminating duplicative language, and 2013, 2014 is when that came about. It was to eliminate those conflicting guidances, focus on performance of compliance, and accountability, provide consistent, transparent treatment of cost, strengthen the oversight, and reduce the waste, the fraud, the abuse, okay? The administrative requirements and cost principles cover our accounting, require that we use the government, GAAP accounting principles, cover our property management, cover our personnel and our travel management. So your travel regulations will be found and governed here. Records management, your allowable and your unallowable costs. Can't buy alcohol, can't pay taxes. I don't mean sales tax. I mean, payment in lieu of taxes to a government, things like that. So you have to make sure that you read that in your spare time also. So management systems, your written policies, your required procedures, your insurance requirements, your drug-free workplace, your procurement, your reporting, your record keeping, your conflict of interest in 2 different places in the administration of contracts is what this one covers. And then we have it, in admissions, which is covered under 1000. Audits, your allowable and unallowable cost, and mandatory disclosures that you have to make. And those steps, recusal, making sure that it's in the meeting minutes, different things like that. The guidance is provided here. So the uniform administrative requirements and cost principles don't provide, procedural requirements specific procedural requirements, required components for our management systems, we have to do that. They give you broad basic standards. You as a recipient, you're considered a non-federal entity, are responsible for creating the details, the policies, the people, the operational procedures, the forms, the documentation of what they call an adequate management system. You define, you design, and you install, implement adequate management systems. I don't like adequate as a word. I always strove to do a little bit better than adequate. Just like I didn't want safe and sound, I wanted good quality housing. You know, adequate is not good enough in my eyes. I strive for more, guys. So it becomes the essential work of your executive director and your management to make sure that you have all of those pieces, you know, to implement and to make sure that, you know, you follow those rules. So those subparts, again, everyone's got them. Subpart A under 200 is your acronyms and your definitions. B is your general provisions. C is your pre-federal award requirements, contents of your awards. D is your post-federal award requirements. E is your cost principles. F is your audit requirements. And then you have your appendices there. Exceptions, you know, there's IHBG rule hierarchy, the statutes of NAHASDA, 24 CFR 1000 and 2 CFR 200. There are no exceptions for subpart F of the audit requirements. If it says you got to have that audit at that certain threshold, you have to have it. So the administrative requirements under NAHASDA, you know, this gives you some of the requirements and standards that you have to follow: financial management, payment, cost sharing, matching, real property, equipment, procurement by states, your de minimis procurement. A recipient shall not be required to comply with 2 CFR 318 through 326 with respect to any procurement using a grant provided under NAHASDA. So the NAHASDA statute is what allows this exception of goods and services with a value of less than $5,000. And it allows us to utilize GSA. So utilizing federal supply sources in procurement in accordance with section 101 of NAHASDA. So NAHASDA statute is the be all end all. If it tells you you have to do it, you have to do it. And it allows for certain things that will override other things. So you always, that's why you always say they go to NAHASDA statute first. Mandatory disclosures, violations of federal criminal law potentially affecting federal awards have to be reported to HUD in writing. If you have any cases of fraud, bribery, gratuity violations, failure to disclose may result in remedies as determined by HUD under subpart F under 1026. So when you go to learn about the guidance sessions, those are still listed, by the way, on the new website. There is, and this is an active link, little, I think they're 10 to 12 minutes long. There's like 9 of them that you can learn about the uniform guidance and how to read it, how to navigate it, things like that. It's the best way to take short little chunks and to learn about it. You know, you could do it one a day for 2 weeks and you'd be done. When you read the uniform guidance, they're precise in your terms. Should means very, you know, it's a best practice, and recommended, you know, approaches. Must means that it's required. So when you read that, make sure that you know. So this is your a screenshot of these website series and resources. And then there's crosswalks and things like that in here. Questions, assessment tools. So there's a lot of guidance in these areas for us to utilize. Okay. So in the administration of contracts, conflict of interest is governed by 200 in our contracting. Okay. So you have to make sure that depending on who your governing body is, if you are under a board of commissioners or if you are directly under the tribal council, that they are aware of their obligation and their expected behavior when it comes to the awarding of contracts. Get in a lot of trouble if you do it wrong. There's certain things that they're going to look for when HUD comes in and they do their monitoring, that your HUD auditor is going to come in when they do their auditing. I've done a lot of tribal council training in the last couple of weeks, I think 3 times in the last 2 months, all over. And that's one thing I've been working with is full tribal councils. You guys need to onboard your board of commissioners. You're the ones that put them in place. You need to teach them about conflict of interest. You need to teach them about recusal. Recusal does not mean backing up from the table and sitting there while they're having the meeting because you're related to somebody that, you know, is going to be probably bidding on this or employed by this or benefits by this. That's not what recusal is. Recusal is getting up and saying, I'm sorry, I am actually related to them. I have to recuse myself. Please let the meeting minutes reflect that. First thing's got to be in the meeting minutes. Second thing, they need to get up and walk out of the building or walk out of the, you know, the meeting room. And then they can't have access to anything that took place during that time where they had to recuse themselves because of that relationship. They can't see the budgets. They can't see the discussions. They can't see any of that. So therefore, whoever is doing your meeting minutes needs to learn about the proper procedures for recusal also. What are they allowed to see? When I work with the tribal councils, I do this, you know, I really try to be careful because it puts your executive director in a horrible place. They're basically, you know, having to onboard and teach somebody that's supervising them their proper behavior and hoping that they have the ethics to do it correctly. That's why I've been working so hard, you know, with tribal councils. That's, you know, part of their position. So vital that you implement a process to onboard your board of commissioners. Board of commissioners need to learn about the programs you offer, policies that your organization has in place. They need to be guided on their expected behavior. Their conduct during a board meeting, what recusal is, what functions they can participate in, what, you know, they need to recuse themselves from, the chain of command, the grievance process. It's an area where our housing entities have a lot of slippage and it can result in HUD monitoring findings. So make sure somebody's paying attention to that. Your conflict of interest, the definition is the same, whether it be in admissions or it be in your contracting. If somebody is in a position of trust, has a competing professional or personal interest, when they make a decision in an official capacity and they stand to profit personally, when your interests have the potential to conflict with the best interests of the organization in which you represent. So under 318C1, you must maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and governing the performance of your employees engaged in selection, award, and the administration of contracts. No employee, no officer or agent can participate in that selection, the award, the administration of a contract supported by a federal award if he or she has a real or apparent conflict of interest. It could arise when that employee, officer, or agent, any member of their immediate family, his, her partner, or an organization which is going to employ or about to employ any of the parties, have a financial or other interest or a tangible personal profit from a firm considered for a contract. Your officers, employees, agents of your non-federal entity have to neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value from contractors or parties to subcontracts. You can set standards for situations in which that financial interest is not substantial or the gift is unsolicited if it's a, nominal value. Your standards of conduct have to provide for disciplinary actions. So make sure that those are in your policies. It's got to have it. And I'll show you an example, but you have to have something like that in your policy. It's got to have the disciplinary action in there under 200-318, okay? To be applied for violations of such standards by officers, employees, agencies of your non-federal entity. So a sample for your gratuities, you can accept food, refreshments, nominal value on an infrequent occasion in the ordinary course of a breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Other meeting where an employee can properly be in attendance, accept unsolicited advertising materials such as pins, calendars, other items of nominal value. I wrote that so my staff and I could go to AMREND or NIHC. It would be common for AMREND to pick up the lunch tab for everybody sitting at the table. They wouldn't say, no, that one, that one, and that one, and that one, because those are our customers. They would buy the whole table. It would allow me to get, the NIHC paper opener or the NLC notebook, or a piece of paper there. It would allow me or my staff to be able to grab something like that and not risk, being in trouble. You have to set that amount. It could be 25. It could be, I've seen it as high as 100. It's whatever your organization feels fit, to set. Shall not solicit, accept directly, indirectly, any gift exceeding $50 in this sample, in value, gratuity, favor, loan, anything of monetary value from a person or organization who has in the past or tends to seek to obtain a contractual business, financial relationship, someone who has interest who could be affected by the performance or non-performance of an employee's official duty. No employee, officer, or agent can participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract if they have a real or apparent conflict of interest. When the employee, officer, or agent, or a member of his or her immediate family has a financial or other interest in a tangible personal profit from a firm considered for a contract, you have to maintain written standards of conduct with respect to organizational conflicts of interest. So, you should have a code of conduct, that your housing entity prohibits your officers, employees, and agents from participating directly or indirectly in the selection or the award of a contract if a conflict, real or apparent, would be involved. The conflict could arise when a financial other interest in a firm selected for award is held by, and then, that's the standard definition. You need a really good definition of what immediate family is. And it could be long, if you look at this one, look at it. It goes all the way stepson, stepbrother, stepsister, sister, niece, nephew, brother, husband, wife. It's long, but you need a good definition, and that's what you have to have, for immediate family in your policies for this particular purpose. It extends to his or her partner by law or somebody that's going to employ or negotiating to employ. Okay. So this is basically your violations. You should have something very similar to this. Disciplinary actions will be taken to remedy violations of the code. Can include verbal or written warning, formal reprimand, suspension, or dismissal. The level of that action will depend on the severity of the violation, the individual's prior behavior, the nature of the individual's position. Notice that the housing entity communicates the requirements of the code during orientation, at trainings, and bylaws of the Board of Commissioners, and in its personnel and procurement policies. So make sure you also have your Board of Commissioners, your tribal council, and your staff signing off on confidential information, different areas like that. Disclosure of confidential information to any person not authorized by your contracting officer. Your contracting officer is usually your ED. To receive such information shall be a breach of ethical standards. It includes, but is not necessarily limited to, the contents of a bid prior to a bid opening or a proposal prior to contract award using competitive proposals, names of individuals, firms, that have submitted bids prior to a bid opening, proposals prior to a contract award. Your housing entities generated information related to procurement, your cost estimates, your contractor selection, your evaluation, your plans, your specs, anything before that solicitation is issued. Any other information, the disclosure of which could have a direct bearing upon the contract award or your competitive process. It is a breach of ethical conduct for any current or former employee, officer, or agent to knowingly use that confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain or anticipated personal gain of any other person. So you should also have codes of standards of conduct, because the awarding of those contracts, by your recipients, housing recipients, includes expenditure of federal funds. That's why the eyes are on it, because of the form of funds that we utilize. Our contractors are held to a higher standard of conduct than those who work in, private contracts. To maintain confidence that your housing recipient's procurement process is fair, it's essential that those standards of conduct are maintained at all times. Employees, board members, they have to carry out their duties impartially, to assure fairness. They need to conduct themselves in a manner as to promote confidence in the integrity of your organization. Any attempt by a board member, tribal council member, a staff member to realize personal gain by conduct inconsistent with proper procurement procedures should be a breach of your housing standards of conduct. Upon discovery, of any actual or potential conflict of interest, your employee, officer, commissioner, agent is supposed to promptly file a written statement of disqualification and withdraw from further participation in, that transaction. You have to maintain written codes of standards of conduct governing the performance of those employees engaged in the award in the administration of contracts. They're governed under 200-11. Again, they cannot participate in the selection of the award or the administration of that contract supported by federal funds if that conflict of interest, real or apparent, it could be perceived, and you have to step back, would be involved. So anybody who exercises or has exercised that responsibility with respect to activities funded by, the housing entity who is in a position to participate in that decision-making process or gain any type of inside information with regard to those activities can obtain a financial interest or benefit from that housing-related assisted activity. They can't have an interest in any type of contract or subcontract agreement for themselves or anybody who they have a family or business tie during their tenure or 1 year after. Now, that used to be a standard requirement under the 37 Housing Act. Pre-NAHASDA, it was 1 year, hands off if you were tribal council, board of commissioner, or a staff member. That took place. You couldn't have any dealings with the housing entity or profit from them. And it's a good idea, and a lot of the housing authorities are putting that back into place. So, any person who is an employee, agent, consultant, officer, elected, appointed, official, officer of the tribe or the housing entity, or a subrecipient that's involved in making, and is immediate family using whatever definition you use. And then again, it goes to his or her partner or that organization who is trying to employ or negotiating to employ any of the above. Okay. So make sure that you have standards in there, put them in place. If you don't, get some and start doing, that type of background information with your board of commissioners, your tribal council, and your staff to cover yourself. You should have a code of ethics. Okay. Code of ethics is basically a bunch of we will nots and we will. You're going to respect the opinions of other board members. You're going to call to the attention to the board any issues that have an adverse effect. Recognize the board member's job is to ensure that your housing entity is well managed, not to manage it. Vote to hire the best possible person. Represent all constituents, not solely a geographic group. Consider yourself a trustee of your housing entity. Always work to learn about your board member's job, how to do it better. Declare any conflict of interest between their personal life and their position on the board. Avoid voting on issues that appear to be a conflict. Keep well informed of your developments. Recognize that the authority is vested in the board when it meets in legal session, not with individual board members. Respect and support the majority of the decisions of the board and the opinion of your other board members. What you should not do is be critical inside or outside of the board meeting of other board members and their opinions. Use your housing entity for personal advantage or the advantage of family or friends. Discuss confidential proceedings of the board outside of the board meeting. Promise prior to a meeting how you're going to vote. Interfere with the duties of the executive director or undermine their authority, or be involved in any type of self-dealing. That 1 year prohibition that we talked about, this is, some of the language. During their tenure and 1 year thereafter, no commissioner, officer, or employee, anybody of the governing body of the tribe who exercises any responsibilities or functions with regard to a project shall voluntarily acquire interest, direct or indirect, in the project or property included. So there's the guidelines that you could look at putting into place to cover that. Any violation of the foregoing provisions shall constitute misconduct in office. Okay, not applicable to the acquisition of any banking institution. And there's my warning bell. And then your 7 keys to your conflict of interest. And this is actually a HUD publication. And basically it is conflicts of interest arise when officials or staff tend to benefit directly or indirectly through business partner or relatives. Elected officials voting on awarding of funds where family members on the staff, directors, subrecipients entering into contracts, grantees, staff who have relatives who could benefit, failure to notify HUD about conflicts of interest, or late or incomplete request for exceptions. The existence of a conflict of interest does not mean that any individual acted improperly or illegally, but it does mean that unless it's properly handled and addressed, they could end up being in violation of federal rules. All cases have to be identified and resolved by eliminating conflicts of interest or obtaining a written exception. 2 sets of conflict of interest rules exist, one for procurement, one for non-procurement. That's basically your admissions. Tells you to go to 200, covering, conflict of interest, including organizational conflicts of interest, and your non-procurement standards under 112. Establish conflict of interest policies for federal awards to disclose and rating any potential conflicts of interest to HUD, and to make sure that your employees are trained. You need to build an organizational culture conscious of potential conflicts of interest so that actions can be taken to avoid or mitigate conflicts as they arise. To have the most impact, your organization should have a written policy requiring annual conflict of interest training. Your legal counsel, qualified individuals, should review the policies with your employees, board members, annually, and document the training. Documenting the training is a best practice. Provide training, require the staff annually submit certificates regarding outside business, employment, volunteer positions, and record, certifications of attendance, and have annual refreshers. Create procedures to document the compliance, the person's name, position, phone number, details the natures of conflict of interest, perceived, apparent, actual, data notification, requested action to address conflicts of interest. Your notification, subsequent answers, actions should be recorded in your meeting minutes. Record keeping best practices include documenting conflict of interest notifications, cases of failure to disclosure by other, for example, a colleague or a member of the public bringing that to your attention, reviews or investigations of alleged conflicts, assessments of how it's going to be considered, actions taken or resolutions, or if you receive, annoying or trivial claims, but you need procedures that show how your conflicts are going to be handled. And then you need to make sure that you implement those regulations. Often people are unaware that their activities are in conflict with the best interest of the organization. A goal should be to raise awareness, encourage disclosure, discussions, and discussions of issues that could constitute a conflict, and constantly encourage that culture of candor. And then have leadership, meetings, your boards and your Tribal councils should be trained. You should have monitoring best practices. Your organization should circulate questionnaires in conjunction with trainings, asking them to disclose existing conflict, remind them to disclose anybody, or anything that could come up in the future. Do you have any relationships with contractors? Are you related, to any builders or someone that, operates a painting business or whatever it should be, and then make sure that they know the consequences. Violating conflict of interest rules can have serious consequences for your grant program. It can undermine, the public trust in your program, as well as damaging those reputations. And your audits, your investigations can actually result in your grantees having to repay federal funds or individuals being fired or prosecuted. So that conflict of interest can actually lead to criminal actions. In some cases, it's not the conflict of interest itself that is the criminal act, but it can lead to other acts, deliberately hiding relationships, financial gains, advantages, false statements, things like that. It's easy to see why disclosures of conflicts of interest are so important. So you can request exceptions if you think, and HUD can, through HUD, and they can grant them if they need to do that. But you should also get the opinion of the recipient's attorney, as long as, it doesn't violate state, local, and tribal law. HUD will determine threshold requirements, make sure that circumstances fall within exception criteria, permitted by regulation. So they're often nuanced, must be reviewed on a case-by-case basis by HUD. And you can always, reach out to your Office of Native American Programs to find out if something is a perceived conflict of interest, how you should be acting. So we also deal with the conflict of interest in admissions. And I realize that we're running a couple of minutes late. I'll get you out of here as quick as I can. So 318, as I just said, under 200 governs everything to do with the contracts. Now you get into the Book of 1000, basically from 30 to 36 govern all of our cases in admissions, okay? Conflict of interest in admissions, we have to report that potential conflict of interest to HUD. It's to make sure that we're treating all of our tribal members fairly. HUD can make an exception if we need to. We need to file the documents, keep them in the files. In some cases, make a public posting. And there's several ways to make those disclosures. They're governed by, and this is in your reference materials, Program Guidance 2002-13. Goes back all the way to 2001. I remember when this, took place. They were trying to see how NAHASDA was doing. They went out and they did basically an audit of all across the United States, all these different housing entities to see how we were doing under NAHASDA. Over half of the housing entities that they audited had no process to ensure adherence to the conflict of interest requirements. And they couldn't assure that their admissions were made to eligible families and that all of our members of our tribes were being treated, fairly. So the requirements prohibit any individuals from benefiting from their positions, again, same way, financially, through the receipt of special benefits other than payment of salary or appropriate administrative expenses. That doesn't prohibit your tribal council, your board of commissioners, your staff members from being admitted into your housing program as long as they qualify. If they are a low income, individual. So to comply with the conflict of interest requirements, you need to have a set of procedures in place. Does your housing entity maintain a list of persons? I thought that requirement was too much. You should have a conflict of interest policy that lays out the steps in which you're going to report a potential conflict of interest to our EWONAP office, our Native American programs, and how we have selected our tenants. So low-income tenants to whom conflict of interest provisions would normally apply, you know, your housing staff, your board members, as long as they're actually low income, it's not a conflict. But we need to, you know, take certain steps to cover yourself so it's not a perceived conflict of interest, okay? And you can read about that in that specific guidance. As old as it is, it's the one that we use. You know, you have to have make sure that you've written and adopted all the policies required by NAHASDA, as well as the conflict of interest provision. So you should have a procedure for a determination of a conflict of interest. Okay. You have to define again what immediate family is, and then you have to make a posting. If they fall under the definition of immediate family, you should have there's a posting in a PDF inside of that guidance. It goes all the way back to 2002, so you're going to have to manipulate it, change it into the 2025s, and it has to go up for 7 calendar days from the date of the posting. You mark who puts it up, who brings it down, when they put it up, when they brought it down, and make sure the full 7 days actually occurs. It'll say, please be advised, all public comments have to be postmarked within 7 days of the initial date of this posting. I used to put up envelopes, on a cup hook when we would put it up, and it has to be addressed to your housing board, and be aware that they will not receive them after, that comment period has expired. Please be advised, all comments must be postmarked within 7 calendar days of the initial date of this posting. All conflict of interest comments must be in a sealed envelope addressed to, the housing authority. Comments that are received will be reviewed at the next regularly scheduled board meeting. They will not consider any comments received after the end of the comment period. Who posted it, where it was posted at, what time it was, who took it down, the specific basis for the selection. So the specific basis is filled in for the first 3, and the 4th one I always put in our next on the list. They're American Indian, they're Alaska Native, their low income is determined by HUD. It's going to be their primary residence, and they were next on the waiting list. So basically that would be the notice that you would put up. The other part to the procedure is you should ask with every application package you have, whether it be rehab, rental, TBRA, every package should have one of these, asking if you are a member of your household, have a family or business relationship with an employee of the housing authority, with the board of commissioners or the tribal council. And that would be the applicant disclosure, for conflict of interest. I'm applying for the program noted above, and I'm disclosing that I am either an employee, a board of commissioner, or a tribal council member, or I'm an immediate family member of a housing employee, board of commissioner, or tribal council, or I am a business partner, to any of those, or I am neither to all of the above. If you are a family member, business partner, to a board of commissioner, staff member, or tribal council, please state their name and your relationship, and then the acknowledgement. I understand that a public disclosure of my selection will be made. A copy of this disclosure shall be submitted to HUD. I have been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy and or receive additional information from the housing entity. And I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify or determine my application ineligible. And that would be it. We're done for the day. So hopefully you'll come back. We'll see you, tomorrow, same place, same time. Thank you for your commitment, to all of our people. And is there any questions there? Take my time. Thank you, Richard. You're a sweetheart. And there's my information. Brooke?
It doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat, just when folks introduce themselves. Okay. But I did put a link to the webinar feedback survey in the chat, folks. If you don't mind taking a minute to complete that, there is going to be a new one for each day of the series. but it helps us know what's working, what we can improve upon. There's an opportunity for you to recommend future topics for our webinars that we can explore, and you can, share some feedback. We share it with our instructors, so Cheryl can know how awesome today was.
Aw, thank you.
Of course. Let me go through the end stuff. You do have some folks typing. Like we said in the beginning, folks, this is a 5-day series. So NAHASDA Intermediate Day 2 is going to take place tomorrow, same time, so 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Alaska. Now that you have joined the learning platform for the Native Learning Center, you won't have to re-register tomorrow. Instead, you're just going to log in, and you'll see a green banner at the top of the screen that'll say NAHASDA Intermediate Day 2 live webinar, and you'll just click on that and join in. We'll post the recording of today on our YouTube Cathedra webinar archive. The webinar recordings go back about 2 years, so feel free to use that, share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues. It's a really great resource. And we hope you check out our other upcoming training events. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We post about them all on our social media. And then if you are a podcast listener, we have an in-house produced podcast, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts, or if you're somebody who likes to actually watch the interviews happening with our guests, we post those recordings to our YouTube as well. But that is all we have for you today, folks. I'm going to leave the webinar room open so that you guys have access to that webinar feedback survey link that's in the chat. But I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.